Kinsale Energy Limited published a report on the decommissioning of gas fields and facilities project over 2.5 years ago. At that time, Kinsale Energy was preparing for the decommissioning of the fields and facilities which were coming to the end of their productive life, having been in production since 1978. Under the licensing terms of 1992, it is said that regarding decommissioning, the Minister should be given at least 1 year's notice. So, Minister, is it right to think that your department has had the decommissioning plan in place since mid-2018, but now this motion is urgent because the Environmental Protection Agency is about to receive an application to dump at sea by the Kinsale Group? My take on the matter, following our short online briefing earlier this week, is that it is already a decided outcome that the Environmental Protection Agency is going to approve the application, because that's why this is coming before us today, because it has to be considered as an option for the EPA to grant the licence. Because, God forbid, we couldn't expect them to actually remove the stuff that they've put in there and made money out of over the last number of years. The dumping at sea application relates just to pipelines and the so-called umbilicals of the gas fields. The wells are being plugged, abandoned, and the platforms are being entirely removed. However, the legs of the platforms will be cut at the seabed. We were told that there will be no trace of the platforms. The evidence that the gas fields were there will be in the seabed. Not all of the pipeline is buried, though. At the briefing this week, we were informed that the pipeline is only partly buried. About 13 kilometres is buried, 3.5 kilometres covered in rock, 3 kilometres are free spanning above the seabed, and 35 to 36 kilometres are currently exposed. Apparently, without this function, the only option is to remove all the infrastructure that is there. And what is wrong with that? Ireland currently holds the chair of the OSPAR Commission, as it had been outlined by some previous speakers. But I think what we neglected to hear from was that the OSPAR Convention of 1992 is a legislative framework for the international cooperation on environmental protection of the North East Atlantic. And Decision 98.3, paragraph 2, relates to the dumping and leaving wholly or partly in place of disused offshore installations, and states that it is prohibited within the OSPAR maritime area. And here we are as chairpersons of the OSPAR currently, that we're going to actually approve this. But here it makes sense that the government is siding with making life easier for corporations rather than adhering to the principles of international conventions and international conventions that we actually are the chairperson of. And so I have no doubt that the application is going to come forward from the Kinsale Energy Limited to the EPA, and it's going to be granted by the EPA, because that's the only reason we're putting this forward here today and this motion is taking place. It's interesting because this legislation was published or was passed, I think, sometime in the 90s, and actually this part of the legislation was never commenced from that point on over 20 years, because it was never an issue, I suppose, because Kinsale wasn't going to be decommissioned at that stage anyway, so it could wait and wait and wait and wait and wait to happen. We're now at the stage where it's going to be, it has to happen to allow the EPA to grant the facility in the first place. It's interesting because over the last while I've been looking at just by accident really, looking at how our governments don't seem to do anything, don't seem to enact any legislation, and then it all becomes a big hurry and a rush job to make sure you get in here, and how the government doesn't even know in some aspects of parts of legislation that it should be interested in, and particularly, I'm thinking particularly in relation to the Department of the Marine and the UK licensed vessels. The Department didn't even know anything about that. It was up to the vessels themselves to highlight the issue. And this is another case of it. 20-odd years this has sat in legislation and done nothing, and nothing has happened. And now it's coming through as a rush job. And actually, maybe that's one positive about this thing, is it actually signals to us that there is something happening and something out of the ordinary, where the Kinsale Energy Limited is going to lead the process for the decommissioning, not the other way around. Thanks.